The alien princess laughed at his weak body until she saw what he was hiding. The grand chamber of the Zelthar royal court was filled with tension as the towering alien warriors stood in a perfect line, their gleaming armor reflecting the golden glow of the ceremonial torches. They were the finest of their kind, trained from birth, engineered for perfection. 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered, muscles like woven steel. Each one a prime example of Zelthar superiority. And then there was him, a human. Elias stood at the end of the line, looking almost laughable by comparison. He wasn't weak, not by human standards, but compared to the hulking Zelthar, he looked fragile, unremarkable. His uniform, though well kept, lacked the imposing bulk of their heavy battle armor. His frame, though toned, did not ripple with the unnatural power of a bio-enhanced Zelthar warrior. From the grand throne, Princess Seraphina watched, her sharp golden eyes narrowing as she examined the human among her warriors. Then in a voice that echoed through the chamber, she scoffed. "This is a joke, right?" she said, arms crossed, the intricate golden tattoos along her skin glowing faintly in agitation. "You expect me to believe that this human is supposed to be my protector?" Elias remained silent, hands clasped behind his back. He'd been through this before. Every species in the galaxy seemed to think the same thing when they first saw him. Weak, beneath notice. But they were always wrong. "You stand in the presence of the royal court," Seraphina continued, stepping down from her throne and approaching him. She stopped just inches away, looking down at him, her expression a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Do you truly believe you are capable of protecting me?" Elias met her gaze, his blue eyes unwavering. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." Seraphina smirked, circling him like a predator evaluating its prey. "That's what they all say, until they break." The warriors around them chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. Elias could feel their amusement thick in the air. He knew exactly what they were thinking. A human? Protecting a Zelthar princess? Absurd. Seraphina's gaze flicked to the Master of Trials, a towering veteran who had served her family for generations. "I assume he's been tested?" The Master of Trials hesitated. "His record speaks for itself, Your Highness. His tactics are unconventional." "Unconventional," she repeated, rolling the word across her tongue as if tasting something foreign. "That's an interesting way of saying pathetic." Elias exhaled slowly through his nose. They always judged by what they could see, never what lay beneath. Seraphina turned back to him, folding her arms. "Very well, human. Let's put your so-called skills to the test." The warriors murmured in amusement. The princess's combat trials were infamous. None had passed without injury. "Choose your opponent," she said with a smirk. Elias tilted his head. "I get to choose?" She gestured grandly to the warriors around them. "Consider it a kindness. I wouldn't want you to break too quickly." The warriors chuckled again, eager to see him fail. Elias let his gaze drift over them, considering. Then he took a step forward, not toward the smallest or slowest warrior, but directly toward the largest, most heavily armored one in the room. A Zelthar named Varric. Varric's amusement faded. He sneered. "You're joking." Elias simply rolled his shoulders, flexing his fingers. "Let's get this over with." Seraphina raised a brow. "Interesting." The Master of Trials barked an order, and the room shifted. The warriors moved aside, forming a circle around the combatants. The torches flickered as the tension grew. Varric cracked his knuckles, stepping forward with deliberate slowness. He was nearly 8 feet tall, his body a fortress of muscle and plated armor. "I'll try not to break you too quickly, human." Elias didn't respond. He simply waited. Varric lunged, lightning fast for his size. But Elias was faster. With a sudden, fluid motion, he sidestepped, evading the strike by a hair's breadth. The force of Varric's missed punch sent a deafening crack through the chamber as his fist collided with the marble floor, leaving a crater in its wake. The watching warriors fell silent. Seraphina's smirk faltered. "That was unexpected." Varric snarled, regaining his balance, throwing another strike. Faster, more precise. Again, Elias moved just in time. He ducked, twisted, and countered with an open palm against Varric's wrist. It looked like a simple tap, until the warrior roared in pain as something snapped in his forearm. Seraphina's eyes widened slightly. The air in the chamber changed. The amusement was gone. Now they were paying attention. Varric growled, shaking off the pain, charging again. This time he went for a grapple. If he got his hands on Elias, it would be over. But Elias wasn't there anymore. He was behind Varric in an instant. With a single, controlled motion, he struck at the base of Varric's spine. One precise hit. The giant warrior's entire body seized up. His muscles locked. His legs buckled. A moment later, he collapsed onto his knees, unable to move. The room fell into complete silence. Elias exhaled, stepping back, calm as ever. "Are we done?" The Master of Trials stared at him, then at Varric, his mouth slightly open. The princess's smirk was gone. For the first time, Seraphina looked at him, truly looked at him. The way he moved, the way he struck, not with brute force, but with lethal precision. Every motion was measured, efficient, honed. This was no ordinary human. She took a slow step forward, golden eyes narrowing. "What was that?" Elias dusted off his hands. "Pressure point technique. Paralyzes large opponents without causing permanent damage." Seraphina stared at Varric, one of her strongest warriors, completely immobilized. She turned back to Elias, her expression unreadable. Then she did something that shocked the entire room. She laughed, a soft, almost disbelieving chuckle at first, then a full, genuine laugh. She had mocked him, dismissed him, thought him weak. And now? Now she was intrigued. She studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "All right, human," she murmured. "You have my attention." Elias smirked, folding his arms. Finally. But the real test had just begun. A charged silence hung in the air. The once mocking expressions of the Zelthar warriors were gone, replaced by something Elias knew all too well. Cautious respect laced with disbelief. Varric, one of the strongest warriors in the royal court, remained frozen on his knees, his massive form locked in place by the lingering effects of Elias's well-placed strike. Princess Seraphina stood before him, golden eyes studying him with newfound curiosity. Elias didn't need a psychic bond to know what she was thinking. She had underestimated him. "Fascinating," she murmured, stepping closer. "You don't fight like a brute. You don't even fight like one of my warriors." Elias shrugged. "That's because I'm not one of your warriors." Her gaze flickered with something unreadable. "Clearly." The Master of Trials hesitated before stepping forward, his expression unreadable. "Your Highness, the trial has been completed. By all rights, he has earned his place." Seraphina tilted her head. "Perhaps, but I need more than a warrior. I need a protector. I need to know." Her golden eyes gleamed mischievously. "What else are you hiding?" Elias didn't react outwardly, but internally he sighed. He could already see where this was going. "You've already seen enough," he replied evenly. Seraphina smirked. "Have I?" The warriors exchanged glances. Even those who had been skeptical now leaned in, eager to see where this would lead. Seraphina turned on her heel, her long, ornate battle robes flowing behind her as she strode toward the exit. "Walk with me, human." Elias followed without hesitation. The moment they stepped out of the grand chamber, Seraphina dismissed the guards. They gave her a hesitant glance, but she waved them off with a flick of her hand. Soon it was just the two of them, walking down a long, dimly lit corridor, lined with intricate golden patterns carved into the walls, symbols of her royal lineage. The quiet stretched between them until Seraphina finally spoke. "I have traveled across 100 star systems," she mused. "I have met warriors, assassins, mercenaries. Every single one of them had something to prove. And yet, you..." She glanced sideways at him. "You don't care what anyone here thinks of you?" Elias chuckled softly. "Not really." She arched a brow. "Why?" Elias exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "I don't need to prove anything to you, princess." Her golden eyes lingered on him. "Most men in my court would kneel before me, begging for my approval. But you act as though you already know your worth." "I do." Seraphina's lips curled into a smirk. "Arrogant," Elias shrugged. "Honest." The princess stopped walking. She turned to face him fully, folding her arms. "All right, Elias." Her voice was softer now, but still laced with challenge. "If you truly believe you are worthy of being my protector, tell me." She stepped forward, eyes locked onto his. "What makes you dangerous?" Elias tilted his head. Finally, the real question. "You've already seen it," he replied simply. Seraphina scoffed. "Parlor tricks. You immobilized Varric, yes, but that was precision. I want to know what happens when you are pushed." Elias exhaled slowly. He had hoped to avoid this. He glanced at her, his blue eyes cool and unreadable. "Are you sure you want to see?" Seraphina's smirk didn't falter. "You still think you can intimidate me?" She wasn't testing him. She was trying to break him. Good. That meant she was taking him seriously. Elias twisted, ducking under her next strike, his enhanced muscles adapting instantly to her speed. He countered, aiming a precise blow to her shoulder, meant to unbalance. Seraphina vanished. Before he could process it, her knee slammed into his side. Hard, pain exploded through Elias's ribs as he staggered back. Seraphina barely looked winded. "Not bad," she mused, tilting her head. "But not enough." Elias let out a slow breath, shaking off the pain. His muscles were already compensating, adjusting. He was learning. Seraphina saw the shift in his stance. Her golden eyes narrowed. Then she attacked again. But this time, Elias was ready. Strength versus precision. The fight escalated. Seraphina fought like a storm, her movements a blur of speed, strength, and fluid grace. Every strike was meant to overwhelm. Elias fought like a shadow, dodging, weaving, redirecting. She was stronger. He was smarter. And for the first time, Seraphina noticed, she should have been able to land a decisive blow by now. Instead, Elias was adapting to her in real time. Every move she made, he countered faster. Every trick she used, he adjusted. Seraphina felt her heart pound. It was impossible. No one learned her patterns this fast. And yet, Elias suddenly sidestepped a kick, spun inside her guard, and struck. His fingers brushed against her throat. The entire hall gasped. Seraphina froze. He could have killed her, and she knew it. A newfound understanding. The silence stretched. Elias slowly lowered his hand, stepping back. "I win!" Seraphina's jaw tightened. She had never been bested in combat, not even by her own generals. But now, a human had just beaten her at her own game. The warriors watching weren't mocking him anymore. They weren't laughing anymore. They were looking at him with something else entirely. Respect. Seraphina exhaled sharply, forcing herself to regain control of her emotions. Then, to everyone's surprise, she smiled. Not out of amusement, not out of condescension, but out of something far more dangerous, interest. She met Elias's eyes. "You fight like no warrior I've ever faced," Elias smirked. "And you hit like a meteor, princess." A flicker of something unreadable passed through her golden irises. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Seraphina extended her hand. Elias stared. The hall held its breath. This was more than just a handshake. This was acknowledgement. Elias reached out and took her hand firmly, shaking it once. Seraphina's grip was strong, solid. And as she pulled back, she gave him a knowing look. "This isn't over, Elias." A grin tugged at his lips. "Didn't think it would be." The gathered warriors erupted in a thunderous cheer. For the first time in Zelnari history, a human had proven himself worthy. And Seraphina, for the first time in her entire life, she was looking at someone not as an opponent, but as an equal. The hall still echoed with cheers. The tension from the duel transformed into a charged energy unlike anything Elias had felt before. He had earned his place, not just as a curiosity, not as a spectacle, but as something far more significant. A warrior, a rival. And if the look in Princess Seraphina's golden eyes was anything to go by, something else entirely. The aftermath of victory. Elias barely had time to catch his breath before the Zelnari warriors swarmed him, slapping his back, gripping his shoulder, laughing in that deep, rumbling way their species did. "Never thought I'd see the day a human held his own against the princess. The stories will spread across the stars. Tell us, human, how did you do it?" Elias smirked, rubbing his ribs where Seraphina's knee had nearly cracked them in half. Let's just say, I'm good at learning fast. Another round of booming laughter. But Seraphina? She was silent, still watching him. Elias could feel the weight of her gaze, the way she hadn't moved since their handshake, the way she hadn't stopped staring at him since he nearly took her down. And then, she turned on her heel, her silvery black cloak swirling behind her. Enough! The human has earned his place. The warriors silenced instantly. Seraphina rarely praised anyone, and now, she was treating Elias like he belonged. A private invitation. Later that night, Elias was in his quarters, bandaging his ribs, when the door hissed open. He didn't even have to look. He already knew who it was. Princess, he said, not turning around, didn't peg you for the late-night visitor type. The door slid shut behind her. Seraphina's voice was calm, steady, too steady. I need answers, Elias. He finally turned, leaning against the metal counter, arms crossed. What kind of answers? Her golden brows furrowed, her mind racing. You're telling me that your own enemies created the technology you now use? A humorless chuckle escaped Elias. Yeah, irony's funny like that. She frowned deeper. Explain. Elias rolled his shoulders, letting out a slow breath. He rarely talked about this, but something told him that Seraphina needed to hear it. A long time ago, humans were nearly wiped out by a species called the Xenoverse. His voice was measured, calm, but there was an edge to it. They were stronger, faster, and more advanced. We had no chance against them. Seraphina listened intently. They didn't just attack our planets, Elias continued. They experimented on us, captured humans, tried to break us. But instead of destroying us, they made a mistake. Seraphina tilted her head slightly. What kind of mistake? Elias flexed his fingers again, watching as the biofibers beneath his skin pulsed in response. They taught us how to adapt, he said simply. Seraphina inhaled sharply. Elias could see it click in her mind. Your augmentations? They weren't just given to you, she murmured, her voice lower now. Your people stole the Xenoverse technology. A slow smirk tugged at Elias's lips. Not just stole it. He turned his gaze toward her, his blue eyes sharp. We perfected it. A dangerous revelation. Seraphina walked in thoughtful silence, processing everything she had just learned. She was rarely caught off guard, but Elias had managed to do it twice in the same day. She exhaled sharply. No wonder you don't fight like a brute. You fight like something else entirely. Elias chuckled. That's the idea. Seraphina stopped walking, turning to fully face him. I must ask you something, Elias. He lifted a brow. Oh? Her expression grew serious. The Xenoverse nearly destroyed your kind. Now you wear their power as your own. Tell me, do you intend to use it against them? Elias held her gaze. The truth was, he didn't know. I fight to survive, he finally said. Whatever happens next depends on them. Seraphina studied him for a long moment. Then to his surprise, she smirked. You're more dangerous than I thought, human. Elias grinned. I get that a lot. Her golden eyes gleamed. Good. She turned sharply on her heel, continuing forward. Elias followed. For the first time since arriving in the royal court, he had earned something more valuable than survival. He had earned her intrigue. And that was far more dangerous than anything else in the galaxy. A stillness settled between them, charged, expectant. Princess Seraphina's golden eyes narrowed, watching him like a predator sizing up a new, unexpected challenge. Elias had spent his whole life being underestimated. He was used to it. But now he had her full attention. She wasn't mocking him anymore. She wasn't dismissing him anymore. She was watching, learning, and Elias knew what that meant. Seraphina wasn't just a royal, she was a warrior, which meant that right now, she was considering him a threat. The trial of might. The moment they stepped into the grand hall, Elias could feel the eyes of the gathered Zelnari warriors boring into him. Seraphina had called for a demonstration. Her people had laughed when they saw Elias, a mere human standing beside their princess. But that laughter, it was gone now. Seraphina stood at the head of the chamber, her voice ringing with authority. "The human has proven himself worthy of standing in this hall." Murmurs rippled through the warriors. Doubt, skepticism, curiosity. One of the warlords, a broad-shouldered Zel-Nari male, Commander Vilos, stepped forward, his arms crossed over gleaming battle armor. "Your Highness, no offense, but this creature barely reaches my shoulder." Elias smirked. "No offense, but you're compensating for something?" The warriors stiffened. A few of them chuckled. Seraphina fought the hint of a smirk, but her gaze remained cold. "The human will take the trial of might," she declared. Velos arched a brow. "Against whom?" Seraphina turned, locking eyes with Elias. "Me." A hush fell over the hall. Vilos frowned. "Your Highness, you can't be serious. The human is mine to test." Her voice was final, absolute. "Do you object?" Vilos hesitated, then slowly shook his head. "Elias," he just grinned. "You want to fight me, princess?" he asked, rolling his shoulders. "You sure that's a good idea?" Seraphina's golden eyes flashed. "I don't want to fight you, human." She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her voice dropping into a deadly whisper. "I want to understand you." The duel begins. They stepped into the combat ring, surrounded by towering pillars of obsidian. The moment the ceremonial gong rang, Seraphina moved like lightning. She was fast, really fast. Elias barely had time to sidestep as her first strike sliced through the air, where his ribs had been seconds earlier. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the hidden device on his wrist. With a single press, the illusion around him flickered. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. The slight bulk of his uniform seemed to shimmer, shifting to reveal the underlying exoframe beneath his skin. Thin, nearly invisible strands of biofiber pulsed along his forearms, barely noticeable unless you were looking for them. His muscles, though appearing natural, were reinforced with enhanced density. Not cybernetic, not artificial, something else entirely. Seraphina's confident smirk faded, her eyes widened. "What?" She reached out instinctively, but stopped just before touching his arm. Elias deactivated the disguise entirely. Now she could see what lay beneath the surface. Not just muscle, not just bone, a fusion of organic and engineered power. "My kind doesn't believe in brute force," Elias said quietly. "We believe in efficiency." Seraphina took a slow breath, staring at him as though seeing him for the first time. "This isn't normal human technology," she whispered. "This is something else." Elias nodded. "A long time ago, my people realized something. We can't outmatch you in strength. We can't grow taller. We can't become warriors in the same way you do." He lifted his hand. The biofibers along his skin responded, pulsing, shifting, adjusting like living armor. "So we adapted." Seraphina exhaled sharply, still processing what she was seeing. She was rarely caught off guard, but now, she was shaken. Elias deactivated the enhancements with a flick of his wrist, the fibers vanishing as if they were never there. He stood before her again. Just a man, but Seraphina knew better now. He was far from just a man. For the first time, there was no mockery in her gaze, no amusement, just genuine curiosity, and something else, something deeper. "All right, Elias," she murmured, her voice softer now. "You have my attention." A slow smirk tugged at his lips. "Took you long enough." A charged silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken realization. For the first time since meeting him, Princess Seraphina did not speak. She simply stared, golden eyes flickering with emotions she wasn't accustomed to feeling. Disbelief, intrigue, and beneath it all, a cautious kind of respect. Elias could almost see the calculations in her mind, the way she was processing what she had just witnessed. His biofiber augmentation, his enhanced strength, his precise control over his body's limitations, all things she hadn't expected from a human. Not a single person in her royal court had considered Elias a threat. Now, Seraphina wasn't so sure. She finally let out a slow breath, her voice measured but no longer condescending. "Your kind has evolved." Elias tilted his head slightly. "You could say that." She took a slow step forward, narrowing her eyes as though studying him from a new perspective. Your body, your movements, they weren't just enhanced, they were optimized. He said nothing. Seraphina's gaze dropped to his arm, where she had seen the living fibers shift beneath his skin. Her fingers twitched at her side, as though resisting the urge to reach out and confirm what her eyes had already told her. You weren't built for brute force, she murmured, more to herself than him. You were built for precision. Ilias let a small smirk tug at his lips. Now you're catching on. Seraphina's golden eyes flickered with something sharp and unreadable. How much of you is augmented? The air between them thickened. Ilias wasn't surprised by the question. It was inevitable. I wasn't enhanced the way your warriors are trained, he admitted. My people don't believe in relying on raw muscle or size. We rely on something else. He lifted his hand, flexing his fingers. The biofibers pulsed faintly, responding to his neural impulses. Seraphina watched intently. Adaptation, Ilias finished. Her lips parted slightly, her golden irises studying him in a way that felt different from before. She wasn't looking at him like an inferior anymore. She was analyzing him. For the first time since stepping into this palace, Ilias felt something shift between them. Seraphina's initial mockery had been replaced by something far more dangerous. Genuine curiosity. The truth behind the augmentations. They walked in silence through the palace corridors, their steps echoing softly against the polished obsidian floors. Seraphina hadn't dismissed him yet, which meant she wanted answers. Ilias wasn't about to give them freely, but he wasn't going to lie either. Finally, Seraphina broke the silence. Your people created this augmentation? Ilias exhaled slowly. No, she frowned. Then who did? He hesitated, his jaw tightening. The same people who tried to wipe us out. Seraphina's steps faltered slightly. What? Ilias glanced sideways at her. You heard me. Her golden eyes burned into him. You fought me, adapted to me, countered my every move as if… She exhaled, jaw clenching. As if you weren't human. Ilias blinked. I mean, last I checked, I still bleed red. Seraphina stepped closer. Not angrily, not aggressively, but with deliberate intent. You don't fight like a human. He met her gaze without flinching. Maybe you just don't know what humans are really capable of. For the first time, her expression softened, not in weakness, but in understanding. Perhaps I don't, she admitted, and that was something Ilias never thought he'd hear from her. A proposition unlike any other. Seraphina turned away, pacing slightly, as if working through something deep inside her. Then after a long silence, I want you to train with me. Ilias straightened. Excuse me? I want to see what else you can do. She turned back, her golden eyes piercing. And in return, I will show you what it means to truly be a warrior of the Zelnari. Ilias let out a low whistle. So what? You want to make me your sparring partner? Seraphina took another step closer. No, she said quietly. I want to make you my equal. Silence, heavy, charged. Ilias wasn't sure what surprised him more, that she was asking him to train with her, or that she saw him as worthy enough to even consider it. You serious about this? He asked. Seraphina nodded once. I don't make offers lightly, Ilias. His lips twitched. You don't do anything lightly, princess. A ghost of a smirk flickered across her lips. For a brief second, it felt like they weren't just two warriors standing on opposite sides of a battlefield. They were something else entirely. Something new. Something neither of them had words for yet. But Ilias knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. This was only the beginning. A future unwritten. Ilias extended a hand, mirroring hers from earlier. Seraphina hesitated, just for a moment. Then slowly she clasped his hand firmly. The deal was sealed. And as they stood there, something shifted between them. A rivalry, a partnership, something deeper brewing beneath the surface. Ilias had proven himself. Seraphina had acknowledged him. And now they would push each other to become something even greater, together.